And this might be starting a couple minutes before 7, but I'll fill the space.
Cool.
Hi. Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome out. My name is Lane Richins, and I'm the events coordinator here at Weller Bookworks, actually today coming from the dining room of my home. We are blessed this evening to be joined by Jacob Ethan Gibson, author of Mariana the Moon Girl. Mariana or Mariana?
Mariana.
Mariana the Moon Girl. And he's here with Annie Krueger, who is the cover artist and video game fanatic.
Sure. That works.
And so I'm going to turn the time over to Annie and Jacob here in just a moment. First, I want to go over a couple of events that are coming up here on our page. On the 18th, we've got author Kyle Myers on the page, and she has written a book called Raising Them, Our Adventure in Gender Creative Parenting. And she'll be in conversation with Pigeon Paginus, who is an artist and an activist, and also the co-founder of the Intersex Justice Project. And that event will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. And then one more before we get into Thanksgiving, we're having an old friend of ours, Kathy Kirkpatrick, back in the store. She has written the next in her series about American prisoner of war camps. And this one is American prisoner of war camps in Colorado. And she's going to be joined in discussion with Lynn Arave. And she has written Images of America, Layton. So you may not be familiar with the name Images of America, but I'm pretty sure if you saw a cover of any of the Images of America books, you would recognize them. There's seemingly hundreds of them, and this one is about Layton. And those two ladies will be joining us on Tuesday, November 24th at 7 p.m., 2 days before Thanksgiving. Speaking of which, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. It's almost upon us. And with that said, be aware that you can comment, make or post questions, anything you would like on the thread in the Facebook thread beneath. And after the presentation from Jacob and Annie, I will go into it and moderate some questions, some Q&A when we are to that point. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to the two of you. Annie, Jacob, thank you so much for being here with us. I know, Annie, you're in Michigan. Jacob's in Provo. These are the great things about these virtual events. It gets people together from all over the place. So thanks for being here. I'm going to go silent, and I'll see you all in a little bit.
Thank you, Lane. And thanks, Weller Bookworks, for hosting us. How are you doing tonight, Annie?
Pretty good. Ready to talk Mariana the Moon Girl.
Nice. Should we kind of tell everybody how we know each other?
Yeah. I don't know. You want to start?
Yeah. So we met at BYU in the media arts program. I believe you were originally a TA for the intro to film class for me. And then we were in a writer's room together. And I think we had a couple other classes together as well.
Yeah, I felt like we always kept ending up in the same writing circles. And
yeah.
I don't know, there was a lot of mutual respect for each other's style and ideas. And that was good, I guess, in school.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So, we've got some questions for each other. Should we get started?
Yeah, I guess first things first. I mean, this is your event. I think I should start asking you questions.
Cool.
Um, so I know you're working on a second novel right now, and I know since I also I write for a YouTube channel, and so I know that your writing process can shift while you're in the middle of a project or while you have an ongoing project. And so I guess that's kind of a big thing that a lot of first-time authors might be wondering is like, how has publishing your first book changed your writing process or research methods?
Awesome. Yeah, I would honestly say that it's made me just more confident in my approach. I think that one of the biggest like writing milestones of my approach lately has been um, forgetting about what people are going to think about the book and more just trying to write something that I would want to read. And so that's kind of the biggest main factor for me is this cool? Like, do I think this is cool? And that has been like amazing for me. It's opened a lot of like blocks, I would say, in my writing because I was so worried about what people would think about the stories that I came out with. And and so Mariana was actually kind of the first real result of that because it started out as a writing exercise of this tone I was trying to find with like I've always been fascinated by stories that have really authentic, really deep, like dramatic themes, um, but have really absurd elements that like are on top of that. And so I wanted to see with Mariana like how much could I get away with being both really absurd and really emotional in this book.
Yeah.
And I think that now that people are really responding to this book, it's made me more confident in like, yeah, this is the direction that I want to keep going in is trying to find that like that tone of absurdity and truth together. But yeah. And so I know since we met together, like, and I knew you mostly as a writer,
Right.
um, and but you did the cover art for my book, and so my question for you is what is your creative process like, and is there kind of a difference between the way you approach your writing versus your art?
Yeah, definitely. I see it as respecting the medium that I'm working within. When it comes to writing, you have to do so much research behind the scenes. I think a lot of people don't realize how much research you definitely had to do, and a lot of writers do to be able to create these stories that feel like they're live like the worlds are lived in. And so to do that, you have to make it believable to some extent, even when it's like this out there like sci-fi or like new weird kind of genre. You
Yeah.
still have to do a lot of research. And when it comes to my art, there is some similarity with that because I do collage art, and so a lot of my process is finding source materials and allowing those source materials kind of to speak to me in some way. Um, so yeah, it's a bit of a different process. It involves a lot of, I don't know, mistakes, trial and error,
Mm.
cutting out a person from a pulp novel and then realizing that it's not working out so well. Perhaps I should scale things back or start over. And so I know when you asked me to do your book cover, that was like a big moment because I hadn't actually done artwork for another person before. It'd always been just kind of this hobby that I do on the side. And so suddenly I had to actually work to a brief, which I was like, oh crap, I can't just give up on this. I have to actually push through and find the correct materials for it. And so that was definitely a bit of a process. It took longer than I expected. Um, and it's not something that you can really push since you're just combing through archives and Creative Commons and whatever you can to find your materials. So it is definitely very different.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
Um, but speaking of different, I don't know, trying to have a nice segue here. How do you balance authenticity and artistic license when writing characters based on historical figures? Because I know that can
Yeah.
be very tricky.
Especially since I'll be honest, I agonize quite a bit, knowing that one of my main characters was a slave owner in his lifetime, like the ghost of Benjamin Franklin. And so I've always kind of been fascinated with the version of history we were taught at school, that basically like the founding fathers of America were these genius heroes who like ushered in
That
modernity.
romantic, false
Yeah.
history
And
that we all wish was real.
exactly. But then you start to learn like the true history behind them, and there's like a lot of problematic things about it, you know. And so I kept wondering, like, how do I reconcile these two versions of this man in a kid's book that isn't necessarily like a subject that I want to like delve in too deep, but it's not also something that I can completely ignore. So when I was writing this book, I actually started reading Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. And it's interesting because I was surprised at how similar he was in the autobiography to the character that I was inventing for him in this book. And what is interesting about that is that after looking into it and doing some research behind his autobiography, scholars all agree, and I'm pretty sure that Franklin even like said that the version of himself in his autobiography was a character that he invented. And so it's kind of this like his curious, excited, like jubilant and very prideful person was his attempt at making an archetype of who he felt like would be the ideal American. And so you see that in his autobiography. He's one of those people that like pulled himself up by his bootstraps, starting with nothing, and became like one of the most important people in the world during that time. And so I realized doing all this research that I couldn't separate like Benjamin Franklin anymore from like other tall tales in American folklore, like Davy Crockett or Johnny Appleseed, you know, and archetypes have always fascinated me. So having like these tall tale versions of historical characters actually became like a really compelling thing to include in this story, especially with their connection to like the magic in this world that I was building. And so like I acknowledged that the ghost of Benjamin Franklin as a character in my book is a somewhat sanitized folktale version of himself. But I hope that that also has made him a good foil to Mariana's character, because I mean, honestly, a lot of Mariana's character came from this angst I had when I was a little kid, where adults felt so like sure of themselves all the time. They had all the truth. And um, and then I realized when I grew up that I've been making this up as I go along, just as much as I know that other adults that I looked up to and pretended like they had all this amazing truth were also making it up as they went. And so I knew that I wanted to have a character in Mariana be someone who like you wouldn't think would be the emotional authority figure in that situation. But if you look at all of the adults in the Mariana book, they all learned from her emotionally throughout the book. And I think that that's like an important part of Benjamin's character for me. But yeah. So I I want to know like what inspires you artistically. Like I know that from conversations we've had in the past and even just like last week, we talked a lot about like video games and books and movies, and I want to know like what are some of the biggest things from either your childhood or now that you feel like really influence you in your art.
It's funny enough. I was actually leading up to this. I was thinking a lot more about my art than I mean, I have in a while. I'm working on a few projects, and so my art has taken it's kind of gone to the back burner. And Honestly, internet culture just inspires me. I think we like to villainize the internet, especially with the recent election. There definitely are reasons why we villainize the internet. There are not so great places and platforms out there, but I think there's also a lot of really cool, really weird stuff on the internet, and there's no better time to. There was like, I mean, maybe this is nostalgia. You know, I'm a child of the aughts in a lot of ways, and so I think the aughts had some really cool, weird stuff happening with forums, and like Wikipedia was just like this little baby, and everyone loved it except the teachers, and so there's like all these little things that I missed about the aughts internet, and so I find these like little vines and TikToks that I don't know, they're silly and goofy and they kind of inspire me. Like this one, this fire art right here. It's called "Do You Want to Die?" and that's from an anime where I think it's the main character. He kills people with like one punch or something, and he always says "Omae wo mu shinderu," and there was this popular vine that went out where that was just pasted onto everything, and so it means "Do you want to die?" And there was something about this like combination of like so much power and sadness, I don't know, and that it just inspired me. So that's where this artwork came from, and it's very different now. I mean, it's very much like a fire robot witch, but yeah, it's so much of the internet. I mean, there's just so much weird stuff out there you can pull from.
Yeah.
Definitely that. But then when it comes to video games, it's like the classics, Myst, and then the new stuff with like Gone Home. A lot of walking simulators where it's heavily story based. That's mostly what I've been into. So I don't know. I'm very inspired by weird internet people.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, but speaking about Mariana a second ago, I do have a rather serious question. That I think maybe a lot of people might be wondering. Since you are a white man and your protagonist is a Latinx young girl, what did you do to mitigate any issues of colonization with your work?
Yeah. So that was another thing that I agonized over a lot. Because if I'm being completely honest, the image of who Mariana is as a person, like manifested in my mind, in relation to the story, like before I was able to really consider the implications that I might be dancing a line of appropriation. Like Mariana was just always in my mind this little Latinx girl. But I mean, going back to the degree that we both got at BYU with media arts, like one thing that we were taught over and over in multiple classes is examining these types of things and being literate in how how choices can impact readers in positive or negative ways. And so where I landed with this was that I for me to feel good about it, I needed to make sure that Mariana was a universally human character, and that I didn't feel that it was my place to make like statements about like the female experience or the Latinx experience, because that to me would cross the line into appropriation. And so yeah, like that. I knew that I wanted her to just be a human character. And like actually in a lot of ways with a lot of the characters that I've written in my life, Mariana is probably the most autobiographical one. Like I was a pretty like sensitive, imaginative kid. And like growing up in the desert on the edge of Las Vegas was like so magical to me. And so exploring Mariana's character and like her deep emotionality has actually almost been like therapeutic in a way of like being able to revisit that side of me. And then but another thing that I want to mention is that this is actually part of the reason why I decided to publish independently, as, especially since it's always been my dream to like be published from a normal like publishing platform. And so a lot of the requests that, oh, cat.
Yeah.
A lot of the requests that I was seeing from publishers and agents on their websites were that they wanted to see more books that represented a point of view from an underrepresented minority. They wanted diverse voices that they could include in their publishing repertoire. And so I've been for the past year, I've been writing this paper that I is actually going to get published soon in a literary journal. I'm excited about it. But I talk about how in media, we might not actually be succeeding in allowing a broader representation of stories from different cultures and backgrounds, but rather like what we are seeing are like big publications or movie studios and their like token attempts at broadening these perspectives. But really, like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that they are really just commodifying a diverse viewpoint.
Yeah. No, definitely.
And so so it got to the point where I realized that if this book got picked up by a publisher, and maybe a part of it would have been because of Mariana's Latinx background and not necessarily like just solely on the merits of the story, I started having like pretty intense guilt about that, because I know that just realistically, from what I had done research wise on the publication or publishing industry, they really only take chances on new authors 1 or 2 times per year. And so if they're like looking specifically for a new author that comes from a diverse background, who's telling a diverse story and has a unique point of view, if I got that spot, I felt like that was taking away somebody else's spot. And so that's one of the main reasons why I decided to actually go independent. Was I didn't want to feel like I was taking anybody else's spot. I didn't want to feel like I was appropriating a viewpoint. And I think that in the end, like, this story is out there and it's up to readers now to decide. Like, it's no longer me as the author's voice to be able to say like, I intended no appropriation. I tried to do this in like a really sensitive way. But I mean, people have to decide that for themselves. So yeah, it's kind of a interesting line, but I'll let other people decide if I crossed it or not. But speaking of that kind of thing though, with indie publishing, when I decided to go that route, I knew that I wanted to have an amazing book cover. And because I know they say not to judge a book by its cover. I judge so many books by their
Every
covers.
book. Every book.
Like whether they are indie or published by a big publication, like I am very judgmental of them. And so I knew that I wasn't going to skimp. I knew that like I needed to find somebody who matched the tone of this book and who had a style that I respected. And I remember when I was sourcing different artists and like looking up people's portfolios, I just couldn't find anybody that I really was excited about. And then I stumbled upon a post you made on Instagram, and I think it's the one that's above your shoulder. Yeah, that
This
one.
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, oh, this is it. Like I need Annie to do my book cover art. And so one of the things I think that I love about your art, and really like sticks out to me is, and I know this is intentional by you, but I do want to like have you talk about how like your representations of women in your art, because I think that they're very striking and beautiful, and I want to hear more about your process.
Yeah. So originally I I was never really an artist growing up, but I've always loved Photoshop. It's a fun way to spend time during your day in high school. If you're in computer lab, you just get on Photoshop. And a few years ago, I got into Afrofuturism, which it's primarily based in Africa, and it's like a sci-fi new weird genre where people are it's like a bit of speculative fiction on what the future would look like in Africa once it becomes industrialized and
Oh, wow.
and fully into the future. And it's really cool genre. And one artist that I started following was Art X Man. His name's Manzel Bowman, and he does these amazing collages of African people and in space, and with like moons and these beautiful sci-fi scenes. And I was just really awestruck by his art, and that really inspired me to kind of look into my own life and be like, well, what do I get mad at? Like, what are the things that make me rage? And one of them has always been Pulp Fiction covers. Because as a writer, I think there's this era of writers who read a lot of Pulp Fiction because that was where the sci-fi stories were.
Yeah.
And so when I was in my early 20s in college, I was like, oh, I'll read Pulp Fiction. Let me go check that out. And it was always these terribly misogynistic and racist stories where the women were just like objects for the men to play with and save and feel good about themselves. And so I hated that. But the covers are so cool and beautiful and weird. But always the women are portrayed as these damsels or these gorgeous, like, I don't know, barbarians. And
I feel like they're always falling into a man's arms too.
Yeah, they always do the same, like, oh, like they're screaming. They have very minimal expressions. It's always like seductive or frightened. There's no in between. They do not feel joy. They live a very sad existence. And so when I wanted to start doing collage art, and I saw Art X-Man stuff, and then I saw Moon Patrol, who's another amazing collage artist on Instagram. If you don't follow him, you should. He's very big, but he also does Pulp Fiction art. And I saw his stuff as well, and I was like, these women are so sad and passive. I think it'd be a really interesting challenge to see if I can turn them into heroines. And so I started messing around with different covers and cutting stuff up, and slowly I created this wonderful collection of heroines. And part of that process was actually tying in another thing I love, which is Greek mythology. I think everyone kind of has like a little soft spot for Greek mythology since it's ever present in our school system and our children's literature. And also, like, we grew up watching Hercules the movie and the TV show. And so, it was just kind of present throughout my childhood. And so as an adult, I've kind of revisited these great myths and discovered that there are very few positive portrayals of women. And if there is a positive portrayal of a woman, it's like there has to be some tragedy in the end. There has to be, like, they don't treat it like a tragedy, but it's like, oh, Atalanta, we throw some apples on the ground and now you are married, even though you did not want to get married. You have to get married now and have babies, and that's the end of your story. The end, like, your life is over because you're married and you have children. And I just, I don't like that. And so I thought to take these myths and these women of mythology like Medusa and Persephone and portray them in a way where they're making a decision of some sort, where they are kind of actively engaged in their environments. And so that's where a lot of this came from. And then also, I really, really enjoy, I have this kind of quiet series throughout my heroines where I take the pirate men and the sailors and captains that I find, because there's a lot of them, and I make them fabulous. And I think we need more fabulous queer art out there.
That's awesome.
So that's a lot of what I love to do.
Well, and you're working on a new project right now, right?
Yes, I am. So I'm working with Richard Fleming, who did the comic Just Ad Bellum. It's actually on Webtoons now, so if you want to check that out, it's being released every week.
Nice.
But we're working on a comic together called Thalassophobia, which is kind of a retelling of the Argonauts' journey, but into the depths of the Aegean instead of across the Aegean. So that is the Mediterranean of Greece. And we also are like kind of recast the Argonauts. So instead of Jason and Hercules, we're pulling in all the D-lister demigods, you could say, and a lot of women who you never hear about, like Menestra, who is a shapeshifter. So, and these are actual characters from mythology that no one talks about for some reason, and they're very cool. So, yeah, so we're working on that project as well. That should release in the new year, around January, but keep
That's
an eye
awesome.
out for it.
I think I've seen a few images from it on, like, I think Richard's Facebook, and
Yeah.
it looks really fun. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, we're pretty pumped. Pretty pumped.
Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with me for a little while. I think it's time I do my reading,
Okay,
but
cool.
stay on for the Q&A, I guess, afterwards.
Yeah, I will probably mute and hide myself.
Cool, sounds good.
Great.
Thanks everybody who's been listening in so far. I am going to now read chapter 1 of Mariana the Moon Girl, and this is book 1 called The Secret Fate of Butch Cassidy. Chapter 1, Mariana. Mariana paused among the rubble of the deserted museum courtyard and looked up at the huge statue of Benjamin Franklin. She smiled, adjusting the sleeve of her spacesuit, and took another step toward the statue. The late afternoon sun shone through the partially collapsed roof and accented the curious look on his marble face. Around the statue were heaps of broken stone and concrete covered with a thick layer of dust, and ugly vines with sharp thorns grew up the walls. But even among the ugliness of the museum's almost complete destruction, Mariana couldn't help but smile. The warm setting sun felt good on her skin. She was standing before the very first fully intact statue she'd ever seen, and she was about to explore the remains of a museum built as a monument to an ancient American legend. Today was going to be a great day. She could feel it. But she hadn't just come to this museum to look at the many exhibits, Mariana had to remind herself. She had come on business. Her goal was to find an ancient artifact and bring it back to Mr. Steele, the curator of the Museum of Human History, the only museum still being operated in the whole world. In exchange for finding artifacts of ancient American legends, Mr. Steele let her live in the museum, and even though Mariana was grateful for the arrangement, as she had nowhere else to call home, she did wish that Mr. Steele wasn't so strict. He would already be displeased when she got back to the museum, even if she did manage to find the artifact she was looking for today. It had taken her far longer than she expected to find this place, and even longer to find an entrance when she saw how buried under dirt and rock the whole structure was. It hadn't been her fault she was taking so long. Present-day Philadelphia was far different from what he had described to her. But if she wanted to get back without risking Mr. Steele moving on without her, she needed to find the artifact today. Mariana took off her purple backpack, unzipped it, and pulled out a flashlight and a scribbled map. She struggled to get the backpack back on, what with how large the sleeves on her spacesuit were. She loved spacesuits, especially the suits the astronauts from the Apollo missions wore. It had taken her weeks to cut down Neil Armstrong's suit and sew it back together till it was her size. Sure, Mr. Steele had been livid when he saw that what she had done to such a prized artifact, but he eventually agreed that it would be good protection as she searched for even more artifacts, as long as she put it back in the Apollo exhibit when she was done with it. He did draw a line when it came to the helmet, though. It was far too valuable to leave the museum, so she never took it with her. Consulting the map, Mariana scrambled over the rubble in the rotunda and made her way deeper into the museum. She marveled at the many exhibits she passed and how different they were to the exhibits in her own museum. Everything was so organized. This museum was meant for visitors, she realized. It displayed its artifacts with pride, not hoarded and crowded away like in Mr. Steele's museum. Even in the rooms that were partially collapsed, the exhibits were still proudly displayed and labeled, reflecting the time when this museum would have been filled with people. There were some exhibits in her own museum that were just piles of artifacts from human history, like the exhibit on different types of VCRs. No helpful descriptions about the history of VCRs, no guide on the difference between VCR and DVD combos, not even an explanation of what VCRs or DVDs were. It baffled her to see how different this museum was, but she made a mental note to tell Mr. Steele some of the changes they could make when she returned. Mariana entered a huge room with giant versions of organs inside the body. Despite how much of a hurry she was in, she couldn't help but marvel at the brain, walk through the tubes of the digestive tract, and smile at how weird the heart was. But even with how much fun it was to learn about electricity, physics, and the many silly quotes Benjamin Franklin had said, she never forgot her true purpose. Finally, after hours of searching and wondering just what Mr. Franklin could have meant when he said, "A penny saved is a penny earned," Mariana walked past an old janitor's closet with the door hanging off its hinges. She almost didn't notice it since the door was the same color as the wall around it, but she had learned from her time searching for artifacts that the best ones were the ones hidden in nondescript locations. She was now deep in the museum, and even though the sun was probably only just starting to set outside, down here it was cold and dark. She wiped her nose as she pointed the flashlight and pulled open the door. Pushing through a pile of cleaning supplies and grimacing at the strong smell of industrial cleaner, she reached a small tub with a drain in the corner of the room. The faucet for the tub had 3 dials, one red dial labeled hot, one blue dial labeled cold, and one black dial that said, "Secret Exhibit." Mariana nodded to herself, not too surprised to find the way before her so easily. In her time searching for artifacts for Mr. Steele, she'd encountered artifacts carefully guarded and hidden by legends attached to them, sometimes even protected by booby traps and riddles. But considering the kind of people some of these American legends were, she wasn't surprised by their eagerness to have their artifacts found, especially considering the secrets they carried with them. She grabbed the black dial with both hands and twisted hard. A cloud of pressurized dust pushed out from the seams of the wall, causing her to clench her eyes shut and cover her mouth and nose. As she continued twisting the dial, the back wall of the closet slid open in front of her. Grinning, Mariana pointed her flashlight to reveal a cavernous room. Huge spiderwebs hung from the ceiling. They looked like ghosts from the beam of her flashlight, and she shuddered at the sight. The smell of damp moss permeated the air. Compared to the stale, dusty museum behind her, this room couldn't be more different. This had to be the place where it was hidden. It had to be. Taking a tall step to pass the threshold of the janitorial closet and enter the cavern, Mariana found her eyes drawn to a dim light shining in the center of the room. As she moved carefully through the spiderwebs, she approached the light and saw a dais, on top of which sat a copper bust of Benjamin Franklin. She moved quickly after that, not able to contain her excitement. It had taken her and Mr. Steele weeks of research to determine this was the place where the artifact had been hidden, and it took another month just to travel here. Stepping onto the dais, she looked up at the copper bust and smiled at the pair of broken bifocals sitting on the bust's nose. She rubbed her nose with the back of her hand, exhaling a long cloud of mist in the cold room. The mist fogged up the one remaining lens in the bifocals frames. She gulped. Mr. Steele was pretty sure that Benjamin Franklin wasn't the type to place a nasty booby trap over his artifact, but she also didn't want to take any chances. Pulling off her purple backpack, she took out a small leather glasses case, undid the clasp, and pulled out a pair of bright green sunglasses. She held the sunglasses aloft, looking back and forth between the two. Mariana rubbed her chin with her hand, then popped out a lens from the sunglasses. Mariana slowly reached for the bifocals, but as she did, the hairs on her hand and arm stood on end, and she heard a slight electric buzzing grow louder. She pulled her hand away. Maybe Benjamin had taken measures to protect the artifact, Mariana considered. Hesitating for another moment, Mariana noticed the light shining down on the bust was dimming, which meant the sun was almost completely set. She was already so much later than Mr. Steele wanted her to be, and night was one of the safest times to travel out of here. Taking a deep breath, hesitating as long as she dared, Mariana felt a gleam of courage, then quickly switched out the bifocals for the pair of sunglasses. She went still, holding her breath, hesitating as long as she dared. Mariana felt a gleam of courage. She went still, holding her breath, waiting for some sort of consequence. She gasped a bit at the sound of a slight but unexplainable breeze blowing through some of the spiderwebs. Several tense moments passed before Mariana finally let out the air in her lungs in a sigh of relief. She looked at the bifocals clenched in her fist and smiled triumphantly. Just as traces of static electricity sparked out of her fist, the hair on her arm standing on end. "Cool," she whispered. "Congratulations, you found my bifocals," a jubilant voice exclaimed. Mariana let out a shriek, turning around and shooting a burst of electrical current out of her fist. A loud crack like thunder followed the beam of electricity as it shot through the slightly transparent chest of Benjamin Franklin. He looked almost exactly like he did in every picture in the museum. He wore a light blue colonial style suit and had long, wispy hair. But instead of the serious face he had in so many of the museum's pictures, this Benjamin lit up with a warm smile. Unhurt by the electricity, Benjamin held out his hands, trying to calm her down. Whoa, careful there. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm the ghost of Benjamin Franklin, Mariana gasped out, trying to catch her breath after being so startled. I know. My name is Mariana. I'm 11 years old and I hunt ancient artifacts for the Museum of Human History. How do you do? She held out her hand for him to shake. He frowned at her and she noticed him eyeing her spacesuit curiously. I'm very well, thank you, Benjamin answered hesitantly. He tried to shake her hand, but his hand passed right through it. Oh, Benjamin exclaimed. Apologies. That's okay, Mariana beamed. So your artifact is one of the superpowered ones, huh? Hmm? Benjamin responded. I'm sorry, did you say the Museum of Human History? Mariana nodded. Yep. Benjamin nodded in return, seemingly deep in thought about the implications of such a statement. And are you human? Mariana laughed and nodded. Sure am, Uncle Sam. Benjamin smiled uncertainly. And how did you know I'd be here to greet you? Oh, I'm used to the long dead spirits of the artifact's original owners greeting me after I discover their greatest treasure. I met Daniel Boone after I found his hat, Paul Bunyan after I found his axe, and even George Washington after I found his dentures. Benjamin grimaced. You've met George, eh? Mariana nodded, smiling. He says hi. She then stepped down from the dais and walked back towards the janitorial closet. Come on, we need to hurry. We're already late, and Mr. Steele is eager to meet you. And that's the end of chapter 1. Cool. Lane, do you want to come back on?
That is such a great opening chapter.
Oh, thank you.
There's a lot of setup going on there that keeps you hanging for what's coming next.
Thanks. That means a lot.
I do have a few questions out here in Facebook chat land, and anybody else who is watching and you have questions for either of our panelists this evening, just write them in the chat and I'll pass them along. So our first one, Jacob and Annie, comes from Alex, and he would like to know, Jake, of all the authors you like, who do you feel inspires you the most?
I feel like this was a softball lobbed at me, but I think that people who know me well know that I am very inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien. Lord of the Rings had a huge impact on me as a child. There was a time where I read the Lord of the Rings every year. I think from like the time that I was 13 till like well into college. Yeah, there's just something about his world building and his authentic characters that really speaks to me. And really like he actually said something that has always stuck with me as an author. And he said that the beautiful thing about, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said the beautiful thing about being able to read stories is that you're entering a secondary world through the eyes of a character. And that when you see this world through those characters' eyes, you actually stop seeing like the scaffolding of the world that's being built around you. And that's something that I've always loved about stories, is that when we like participate in them fully and really allow ourselves to suspend our disbelief, they really do become like secondary worlds that we become a part of. And I love that.
Thank you. Annie, did you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. My favorite author shifts all the time, but one that definitely has impacted my writing is Emily St. John Mandel. She wrote the book Station 11, which is literary fiction, but it also is a speculative fiction where a flu pandemic breaks out and kills most of the world's population. And it follows a troupe of Shakespeare performers in the post-apocalyptic world as they travel around the Midwest and perform Shakespeare for people in this like new world.
That's amazing.
It's really good. It's really, really cool. And it follows three different timelines, one before the pandemic, one during, and then one after. And so it is a really beautifully interwoven story where she takes these very disparate characters and kind of shows how humanity, I think so often we're shown the worst of humanity in fiction. And I think that that's fine. It's just we need to have the other side as well, where we see, a positive future. And I think we're seeing right now kind of the results of such a long period of negative future portrayal in sci-fi, with so many, just terrible futures shown to us through like disaster and post-apocalyptic movies. And the purpose of sci-fi to some extent is to give us a future that we want to strive for. And I think her book is so beautiful because it portrays the worst that can happen and how humanity, I mean, we've seen it throughout this pandemic. Like, there are bad things that happen, but people still go to work and they still want to, like, I don't know, buy ice cream and like watch their favorite TV shows and watch The Office over and over. So I think we tend to like catastrophize a bit, when in reality things aren't going to be as bad as perhaps they seem, even when the flu pandemic destroys the world and you're left as a Shakespeare troupe traveling in broken down cars pulled by horses. So Emily St. John Mandel, Station 11, very good book.
Yeah, I wrote that down. I'm gonna have to read it to make sure that I don't accidentally steal from her too. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
Jacob, this is for you. This is from Steve. What is something that you have not had a chance to share about your experience writing this book that you would like us to know?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that for me, one thing that I want people to know about this book is how, even though this is Mariana's story, there is a lot of setup being done for future stories that I want to tell. I know we're all kind of tired of cinematic universes, and so I have wanted to create something like that with my own writing, but make it a little more subtle and less like my goal is to be able to create something that you can come into it from any of the storylines created and have a full and awesome experience. But if you do see the connections that are going to be made, it might make some of the stories more full and fun and enjoyable. So yeah, we'll see. I'm hoping that some of the things that and clues and secrets that I kind of inserted into book one of Mariana will pay off eventually. So
yeah, we're hoping that too. The next one is from Amanda, and she would like to know for both of you, what were your favorite books growing up when you were Mariana's age? I think, Jacob, you probably touched on that already a little bit, but I'll let you do with that what you will.
Yeah, I think during that age was when I was reading The Hobbit a lot, and then like there's a book that takes place at the same time as Ender's Game, but it's like told from another character's perspective, called Ender's Shadow. I was obsessed with that book when I was little. I had a paperback copy that I read over and over and over again. And I think that while Orson Scott Card as an author has been disappointing, I still really connect with that book overall.
Yeah, I guess in my case, I was very much into Harry Potter. That was very much my childhood was Harry Potter and Star Wars. but other books I was also into like the Sherlock Holmes collection, and various sci-fi. I was into the Shannara series, and very good, and just a lot of fantasy. Protector of the Small, that's a fantasy series. Oh, I can't remember the author's name, but that has a heroine, and it's just fun. So it was mostly like nerd fiction that I was into, just like random books I'd find in the fantasy and sci-fi sections. That
Yeah,
like
I forgot about Shannara.
yeah, like anything that had a female protagonist, which sometimes was hard to find. That wasn't just like a romance. Like I'd be like, oh, that's my book now. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Annie, if you'll stay there, this one is for you. What do you think has influenced your specific artistic style?
Honestly, movie posters and book covers are very much a part of my life, and whether it's through like graphic design and textual elements, I haven't included that many textual elements in my art, but they do exist, and I like to pepper them in. But it is a lot of portraiture is kind of what I'm going for, and so I mean, it's tricky. The big one really is Moon Patrol. His Instagram is full of his beautiful collage work. He does these just fantastic, surreal images. I mean, one of them has Mickey Mouse with like 6 arms, and he's riding on Odin's 6-legged horse. I can't remember the horse's name, but it's just silly things like that that include a little bit of pop culture. There's this book I read, I don't know how many years ago, that talks about how opera is trash, eat pop instead. And that little line is something that like really stuck out to me. We delineate art in superficial ways. We say opera is the epitome of class, and that pop music is trash. When in reality, we have a little bit of both all over the place. Like there are operas that stink. Like I'm sure we all get bored when we hear opera music. What level do you determine whether or not something is high art? Like sure, it might be more popular to listen to pop because people can understand it easier, but that doesn't make it less than. And so I've always been kind of interested in stuff that might be a little trashy or rough around the edges. And yeah, so I think that has actually inspired my style a lot. I can't remember the name. Oh, The Ghost Network. The book is called The Ghost Network. It's very good. It's yeah. Anyway.
Sweet. Thank you. I forgot to mention that came from Emma. Thank you, Emma, for that question. And now we have one from Josh. Jacob, were there any authors you attempted to not follow in the footsteps of? AKA, were there any styles, approaches, character development, etc., that you decidedly focused on not imitating?
Yeah, actually, I would say that the only author that I was actively trying to distance myself from was Brandon Sanderson, which, like, don't get me wrong, I love Brandon Sanderson. I pre-ordered his book from Weller Books, actually. Yeah, I for a variety of reasons, and just because like I feel like his fantasy books have become the standard of what like interconnected worlds are supposed to be. I wanted to distance myself from that and like actually like make active choices to do things differently than I think he would do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Boy, it's been so busy around the store getting those books ready to go out to all of you. It's coming soon, Jay. Soon.
I saw the Instagram post you guys made of just the lines and lines of books along the walls. That was pretty incredible.
Okay, thank you, Josh, for that question. Next one comes from Mallory. Looks like this is for both of you. She just would like to know what is, as creators and artists, what is your favorite aspect of what you create? Characters, themes, world building, etc. Can you whittle it down to one aspect that you like better than the others?
Yeah, for me, I would say characters the most. Like I love world building, and like I mentioned before, Tolkien was such an influence on me. But I I have this theory that, and I didn't come up with it, but it's one that I've expanded on a lot, that at their core, every character in literature and movies and television and video games, at their core, they are a Ninja Turtle. And so I I love being able to like take characters and start with an archetype of like uh, if people don't know, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, and Michelangelo are the names of the Ninja Turtles, but archetypally they are there's one that's the leader, there's one that's like a warrior, there's one that's the intelligent like nerdy guy, and then there's the party dude. And so I try and take those like archetypes and build off of them and create really like fully fleshed out characters for my books. But yeah, if you ever want to get into it, ask me which characters in my books are which Ninja Turtle, and we can have a fun conversation about that.
I've been silent that whole time, just laughing my ass off.
I mean, I understand, I get it, but it's still great.
What about you, Annie?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I think what I really like about writing is combining, even just in my art as well, I guess, is combining facts and history with my art. I like to include something that people can take away and be like, oh, I learned something from that. Like, it just little things. I really enjoy when nonfiction and fiction kind of get shoved together into these like beautiful messes. Actually, the Ghost Network, one of the books that I mentioned, does that a lot because it talks about different art movements and then fictional art movements as well. But I kind of like, I guess a good example, somewhat good example, is Ready Player One. Like, it talks a lot about 80s pop culture and history. I learned so much about the 80s I never knew and kind of didn't want to know and didn't care to know. But it was still like that sort of thing where you shove in like a bunch of information in like your works of fiction. That's just, I love it. So I don't know. Does that answer the question? I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Okay, our next question, thanks both of you. This one, it comes from Judy. And Judy would like to know what scene from the book, Jacob, is most like an experience from your childhood.
There is a scene, I think it's in the third or fourth chapter, where Benjamin and Mariana are stargazing. And like honestly, there's really like the parts of my childhood that I like remember the most being impactful for me, like imaginatively and emotionally. Some of them were like laying down on the trampoline in my backyard at night and just watching like satellites go by in the sky, watching the moon rise, and like seeing shooting stars, and just something about the like meditative peaceful nature of that. It's like a perspective shift type thing, was something that I knew was important for Mariana's character, especially for people to be able to understand the kind of introspective, emotional person she is. so yeah, I would say that that scene in particular is one that resonates with me a lot from my childhood.
Thank you for that question, Judy. I think we'll wrap it up here with one more question here, Jacob and Annie. First, I want to just say a couple of things that have been left in the chat. We've been joined by people from Montana. Greetings to Dennis and everyone in Montana. There's a comment here from Hannah who says that she loves the detail that brings Benjamin to life. People commenting, Leslie is right there with you about Tolkien. And Josh has a comment about Ender's Shadow and Ender's Game. Ender's Shadow is greater than Ender's Game. I guess. And Steve here from North Dakota. So we're getting people from all around the country. Sure appreciate everybody tuning in for this. It's very cool. I'll leave. This last question will be from Hannah, and Hannah asks, seemingly this is fitting, which Ninja Turtle Mariana is.
She is a Michelangelo. She's a party dude. Like from an archetype perspective, the party dude is kind of the emotional glue that holds groups together. They're the peacemakers. They feel really connected with the world around them. And yeah, so Mariana is a Michelangelo. And part of the reason why I wanted to tell a story from a Michelangelo perspective is because so many stories are told from the Leonardo or Raphael archetypes perspective. And so I thought it would be fun to do it from a different perspective that maybe not a lot of people are used to.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in, Steve, Hannah, Josh, Judy, Mallory, Leslie, any of the rest of you who I'm not, Dennis, seeing here. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to attempt to share this shot here.
Cool.
See if we can see. Can you see that?
Almost.
Oh.
Yeah, there it is. So that's the full artwork that Annie did for the book, which I am just in love with. But it also has like our handles and everything. So if people want to follow us, but I wanted to thank Annie and Lane and Weller Books for hosting us, and wanted to mention that if you haven't gotten your copy of Mariana yet, you can get it on Amazon, or if you want to support a local bookstore and the host of this, you can order this book through Weller Bookworks from Salt Lake. And if you do it through them, it's the same price as Amazon, but I will sign it. And then lastly, I told people that I would reveal the title of book 2. So the subtitle of book 2 is The Last Transmission of Amelia Earhart. And I'm really excited about it. This is, it's coming together well. I'm almost done with the first draft. So yeah, thanks everybody.
That's very cool, Jacob. And I believe that you can look to having the release party for that title through Weller's as well, everyone who's out there listening and watching. Just to mention as well, if you were to order Mariana through the store, you're supporting local business, you're supporting independent business. You'll get Jacob's signature and a cool sticker in the front. I don't know if those stickers go out with every book or not, Jake, but I've got one with my book here at home, and I put it on the fridge and I look at it every day now. So thank you both so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. Thanks to everybody out there who has tuned in. Don't forget to be kind to each other. It's a rough time out there. Stay safe, wear your mask, and have a terrific holiday season coming up best as you can. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you Wednesday night for our event with Kyle Myers. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.